Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. Impact Wrestling. We have some Impact Wrestling stories we're going to get into today. One being the tease of potentially Mickie James, former WWE Superstar Mickie James, current NWA, talent, producer. We know she's producing the all-women's NWA Empower pay-per-view. Former Impact Wrestling star, though, as well, Mickie James. Mickie James, former multiple-time Impact Knockouts champion. Possibly, she could be headed back to Impact Wrestling. At least that was teased this past week on Impact Wrestling. So I want to get into that. I want to get to the reaction of that, because the reaction to that, to be honest with you, the reaction to it on social media I thought was staggering. It really must be said. But let's get into the Mickie James story. Plus, we've got some other stories to talk about as well today. So, obviously, since the spate of WWE releases last April, there's been a lot of speculation as to which former WWE superstars are going to be headed to Impact Wrestling. Some of them being former Impact stars themselves. So, are they going to be going back to the company? Well, this past week on Impact Wrestling, fans spotted, it wasn't difficult to spot, you can see it on the screen there, but fans spotted what is believed to be a hint that former Knockouts champion Mickie James could be returning to Impact Wrestling. Now, in a backstage segment, Knockouts Tag Team Champions Fire and Flavor, Kiera Hogan and Tasha Steelz were gloating after retaining the Knockouts Tag Team Championships this past weekend at Against All Odds. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Rosemary and Havoc then appeared, and Havoc tossed Kiera Hogan into the dumpster. Now, as Kiera Hogan was climbing out of the dumpster, she noticed a garbage bag with a piece of tape on it that spelled out Mickie, obviously referencing Mickie James. Now, this, of course, seems to be poking fun. The revelation made by Mickie James after her WWE release that WWE sent her and others their stuff in garbage bags after their respective releases from the company. Now, of course, Mickie James has a lot of history of Impact Wrestling. She's a three-time former Impact Wrestling Knockouts champion. She has also appeared in the Slammiversary advertisements. Not that that's anything, like an indicator or a hint or a spoiler or anything, because lots of talents have, whether they are Samoa Joe, who since returned to NXT, whether they're Okada, Naito, whether they're, the Forgotten Sons, whether that's Daniel Bryan, whether that's whoever. Everyone, pretty much who's anyone, has appeared in those Slammiversary advertisements. So I wouldn't look too much into that, but certainly it's interesting that Mickie James was at least referenced this past week on Impact Wrestling. Now, it should be noted that Mickie James does now seem to be part of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, where she is producing an all-women's pay-per-view, but it's not impossible that she could have worked out a deal that could at least see her returning at Slammiversary, maybe for one match, or maybe it could even tease some Impact Wrestling talents. Knockouts could be working that all-women's pay-per-view in the future. So certainly was interesting. Now, there's a couple of things I want to get into about this. First of all, I want to get into the reaction of it, because the reaction, honestly, and I found this really surprising, I must be said. I saw this segment, I thought it was funny. I thought, oh, okay, that's a subtle hint that maybe Mickie James is going to be showing up in Impact Wrestling at Slammiversary. Maybe it's a red herring. Impact Wrestling did do quite a few red herrings last year. They teased that the Aces and Eights were going to be returning. They teased that the character of Super Eric was going to be returning to Impact Wrestling. Eric Young did return, but Super Eric didn't. The Aces and Eights didn't return last year. So they did quite a few red herrings, and they do this sometimes from time to time, or it's difficult to do a bit of a social commentary when it comes to Impact Wrestling because they do tape their shows so far in advance. But sometimes they do try and do a bit of a social commentary or poke fun at a major event that happened in the pro wrestling industry, that kind of stuff. So they do this from time to time. But the reaction on social media, again, I thought was staggering. People hated it. Some people were really upset by this. Really upset. They said it's disrespectful to Mickie James. I can't believe Impact Wrestling would call out Mickie James like this. Mickie James is a legend of the industry. How dare Impact Wrestling make fun of her? How dare Impact Wrestling put Mickie James' name on a trash bag? They're calling her trash. They're calling her garbage. How dare they do that? Oh, they're just doing this because she's now with the NWA, and that's a Billy Corgan-owned company, and Impact Wrestling and Billy Corgan have heat, and they're calling out Billy Corgan. They're doing this, they're doing that. And I was like, whoa. Pump the brakes there. Pump the brakes. That is not what's going on. And the people that were upset by that, again, I was flabbergasted. I was absolutely flabbergasted. And I'm not exaggerating as well. Go to the tweet. It'll be on Impact Wrestling's timeline somewhere. Go to the tweet where they showed this video just after it aired on AXS TV. And some of the replies and some of the quote tweets, incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible that some people were really offended that Impact Wrestling had somehow dissed Mickie James, or they'd called her trash, or they were being disrespectful to her. And again, it's like one of these things of, no, that's just not... That certainly isn't the way I perceived it, and I certainly don't think that's the way that Impact Wrestling intended that to be. Impact Wrestling did a couple of things with this segment. One, they teased that Mickie James could be coming into Impact Wrestling. That's one thing. And again, you have to remember when this was taped. This was taped like 5 or 6 weeks ago. It's around the time of the trash bag gate that happened in WWE during that period of time. So remember that. So I'm pretty much sure when they taped this, that was the big story that week. So they were trying to be like, again, a social commentary, but 5 weeks later, maybe it loses some of kind of its buzz. I don't know. But they were trying to tease Mickie James could be coming into Impact Wrestling. That's one. They could also see as a tease that Fire and Flavor, Tasha Steelz and Kiera Hogan, they could be coming into the NWA. They have history with the NWA, right? So that could be seen as well. They have the all-women's pay-per-view. Maybe Fire and Flavor are going to be a part of that. Who knows? It could be laying the foundation for something else. 3, maybe it's just a case of them trying to show support for Mickie James, or them trying to just, again, do a bit of a funny comedy bit. Just trying to reference a bit of social commentary as to what was happening at the time. If you're going to be offended and upset that Mickie James has her name on a trash bag and she would be treated that way and it's horrible and it's such a disrespect to Mickie James, Impact Wrestling aren't the one that actually did that in real life. WWE are the one that actually did that. That's like watching a Saturday Night Live sketch of when someone, gets disrespected in the news media, and then Saturday Night Live does a parody on it going, I can't believe Saturday Night Live, they're taking the mick out of it. You would say, no. Actually, if you're going to be angry at someone, be angry at the real life event, not the parody. This is a parody of something. Be angry at the real life event. Be angry at WWE. They're the ones that sent Mickie James her belongings in a trash bag after she was released. That's the real disrespect there, not Impact Wrestling. If you're going to get upset at anyone, certainly don't get upset at Impact Wrestling, because they're not the ones that actually did it. The ones that actually did it were WWE. And it's just this kind of, again, weird response. It was almost like a lot of the people that saw this segment or saw it on social media weren't aware of the story of Trash Bag Gate from several weeks ago, that they thought that Impact Wrestling were just putting Mickie James' name on a trash bag, calling her trash, which isn't the case. What it's referencing, as I mentioned, is Trash Bag Gate, which Mickie James actually kind of blew the lid on. But essentially what Trash Bag Gate is, that for years and years, it was found out when a talent was released by WWE, certainly the female talent. We don't know if it's so much the male talent, but if it's just a female talent, frankly, that's even worse. But certainly a lot of the talents, when they were released by WWE, they would have belongings, whether that be at the Performance Center, whether that be with some of the staff, seamstresses, or whatever. They would have their belongings, whether it's gear, whether it's makeup, whether it's whatever. And essentially, they would get their gear or their belongings or whatever sent to them via FedEx, and it would arrive in a trash bag. So not only have you just been fired, you feel like trash. WWE quite literally has thrown you out and your belongings in a trash bag, like trash, like garbage. It's a good indicator of how WWE feels about you. And by a lot of accounts, this has been going on for years. Mickie James said that that's how she got her belongings back in 2010 when she was released by WWE. That's 11 years ago. And so many other people came out. I think it was Maria Kanellis said that she had a similar thing. She got her stuff in a trash bag. And one of the talents, it might have been Chelsea Green, said she got the belongings in a trash bag as well, but she also got Lana's belongings when obviously that didn't even belong to her. So they got their wires crossed, and because of that, Mark Carrano, who had been with the WWE for a long, long time in the talent relations department, was fired over Trash Bag Gates. Obviously, you saw public apologies from Stephanie McMahon, Triple H, publicly apologizing to Mickie James, saying that the person responsible had been fired, that being Mark Carrano. So I felt that, to be honest, when I saw this on Impact on Thursday night, I went, okay, it's a tease. Maybe Mickie James shows up, maybe she doesn't. Again, knowing Impact Wrestling's track record for the last year, it's a 50-50 one, really, because I kind of lean more to her not coming in, to be honest, Mickie James, because, again, she has just signed with the NWA. She is very, very busy with this NWA in Power pay-per-view and the female pay-per-view, and I look at it more as the only reason Mickie James, I think, would come into Impact at this point is to work something out whereby maybe she shoots an angle at Slammiversary or something like that, that they can then pay off at the NWA pay-per-view. So maybe she does come in and maybe faces Deonna Purrazzo, and then they run it back, they do a rematch or something at Empower. They could do that, maybe, but I think she's going to be so busy with the NWA that I really don't see it happening. But look, I thought it was just a tease. And again, expect more of them, because we got so many of them last year heading into Slammiversary. As I mentioned, we got the Aces and Eights, we got Super Eric. We also got a one where it was Moose last year, wasn't it? Moose, I think he defeated Hernandez or someone like that. He retained his TNA World Heavyweight Championship. They just started playing EC3's entrance theme at the time, the whole Trouble, Trouble, Trouble song. And again, that was an indicator of what was to come in the future. And they'll do this. They'll do this between now and Slammiversary because they want to build up hype. They want to build up some suspension. They want to build up, some intrigue surrounding the event. So I didn't have a problem with it. If you had to, again, say, Owen, where do you think Mickie James is going to go? Is she going to come back to Impact Wrestling? Again, I just don't really see it. I might have previously. I always thought NWA was the most likely destination for her anyway, and I said that on all the videos we've spoken about here about her on the channel, and I said I always felt that she was going to go to the NWA, mainly because of the Nick Aldis ties, but also the ties to Billy Corgan as well, and it just made too much sense, frankly. And I think she was there for a lot of NWA tapings anyway, so I think it would have just been out of the frying pan into the fire, frankly, just going into another promotion. And it's almost like, while she did get released by WWE, essentially she got a promotion because she's an executive producer. That's a big deal. So I just don't even think she'll have the time. She spoke about not even wrestling on that show, that Empower show, because she's going to be busy running it. So I don't even think she'll have the time to work for Impact Wrestling. But I didn't have a problem at all with the segment this past week. Not at all. Now, an interesting news story that broke last night, and that is the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows and Karl Anderson, their return to New Japan Pro Wrestling has been confirmed, because New Japan Pro Wrestling announced Friday that the Good Brothers will be returning to the company in July to compete in the Tag Team Turbulence Tournament. There's a lot of T's there. On New Japan Strong. Now, Karl Anderson and Doc Gallows, former 3-time IWGP Tag Team Champions, will face the tag team of Clark Connors and TJP in their first round match. It will be the Good Brothers' first appearance on New Japan Pro Wrestling television since their departure from the company in February of 2016, before they signed with WWE. The New Japan Pro Wrestling website has announced the following first round matchups: Clark Connors and TJP versus the Good Brothers, Karl Anderson and Doc Gallows. LA Dojo versus West Coast Wrecking Crew, Yuji Nagata and Ren Narita versus Fred Yahi and Wheeler Yuta, Violence Unlimited versus Team Filthy. Now, this isn't really a big surprise, to be honest with you. It was a matter of time before the Good Brothers started working with New Japan. When the Good Brothers signed with Impact Wrestling last year, one of the big points of contention and real caveats in their contract at the time was that they wanted to work for New Japan. Again, you have to remember the context at the time. When the Good Brothers' 90-day non-compete clause with WWE expired last year, New Japan wasn't an option. The reason New Japan wasn't an option was because of the pandemic, of course. They couldn't go to Japan, but they could work out a deal with Impact Wrestling, and Impact Wrestling at the time certainly had the working relationship with New Japan. Whilst AEW did have contracts, and they do have contracts now, but certainly even back then, they did have contracts that stipulated if you want to work days of New Japan, you can. You can go over to Japan. You can work dates in the Tokyo Dome, Dominion, whatever, because people like Chris Jericho, Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, Brody Lee, they all had that written into their contract. John Moxley also has that written into his contract as well. But I think at the time, the Good Brothers wanted even more flexibility when it came to possibly working with New Japan. So that was a big eye-opener for Impact Wrestling for them. And frankly, they wanted a bit of distance between them and AEW before they eventually came over. There was some residual heat between the Good Brothers and the Young Bucks at the time, which has obviously since subsided. But a big point of their signing with Impact Wrestling was, we'll sign with you. You can have priority on our dates, but we want to work for New Japan. When the opportunities to work for New Japan open up, when we can travel over to Japan, we want to be able to do that, and we want to be able to do that with a greater degree of flexibility than maybe we would have with AEW. And Impact Wrestling agreed to that, and now we have finally the Good Brothers returning to New Japan. Now, I probably think the reason why they've waited so long to do this, obviously, is because the New Japan Strong Show, when did that launch? It launched sometime last year, but I think ideally Karl Anderson and Doc Gallows would have wanted to make their New Japan return in Japan at a big event like the Tokyo Dome, like Wrestle Kingdom, like Dominion, like the G1, something. They would have wanted to do something at a big show like that. Obviously, that just hasn't been a possibility because of the pandemic. Right now, Japan, it's still not in the best condition right now, Japan. It's crazy, actually, thinking that the Tokyo Olympics are what? a month away, 6 weeks away, something like that. It's crazy, and you still got a state of emergency going on in Japan. It's still quite a crazy situation, and I think ideally the Good Brothers would have looked at this and said, actually, we want to make our big return to New Japan, because obviously that's where they made their name. Certainly Karl Anderson, that would be like a massive, massive homecoming for him. He would want to do that on the biggest stage possible, ideally maybe in the Tokyo Dome, for a match at Wrestle Kingdom, for the IWGP Tag Team Championship, something big, right? That's what they would want to do. And as time has passed, it's just not possible. It's just not possible for them to do. And I think ultimately we've got to a point now where the Good Brothers have said, you know what? We want to return to New Japan, and it just doesn't look feasible that we're going to be able to do it in Japan or in Tokyo or wherever anytime soon, or Osaka. So let's just already get our foot in the door. Then eventually we can return to Japan in the future once it's safe to do so, once travel's a lot easier, because again, the travel between the United States and Japan still is quite difficult. There's still a quarantining period and all that kind of stuff. So I think ideally they would have wanted to do it on the biggest stage, but they can't do that right now. And I'm sure that New Japan probably reached out and said, look, the New Japan Strong show isn't really doing the numbers that we want it to do. It hasn't got the traction we want it to. I'm sure New Japan have probably reached out to Impact and the Good Brothers and said, look, can you have some of your stars come over, whether it's Josh Alexander, whether it's TJP, whether it's the Good Brothers, get your foot in the door. If you get your foot in the door, then maybe we can discuss doing something at a Tokyo Dome show, at a Wrestle Kingdom, at a Dominion, at a wherever in the future. Just get your foot in the door, basically, and we can start the storytelling of your eventual New Japan Pro Wrestling return on the New Japan Strong show. So I think that's ideally probably the destination that they're going in. As far as will they win it, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't. And I know that's probably a big statement because they are an Impact Wrestling contracted talent, but in the realm of New Japan, this is one of, not one of the most successful teams, but certainly one of the bigger teams in recent history. Again, they've got a ton of history with the company, especially Karl Anderson has a ton of history with the company. And if New Japan really wanted to make a statement, then I think that you would have them win that tournament and you would build up the anticipation for their eventual return to the Japanese shores. I think that would be what they do. Now, again, time will only tell. But the Good Brothers is certainly interesting because I've been quite critical of their booking in Impact Wrestling recently because Lord knows they can't get a win. I mean, they can't get a win. The Good Brothers, their record on pay-per-view events or Impact Plus events this year is abysmal. I mean, it's really, really poor. Go back to Sacrifice, they lost. Impact Rebellion, they lost. Under Siege, they lost. They lost at Against All Odds. So whilst they're appearing in all of these different promotions, because of course they're appearing for Impact, they're appearing regularly on AEW as part of the Elite with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, but they're now appearing on New Japan and Impact, they're losing all the time. On AEW, it's a little bit different. They are picking up victories, but I expect them to be booked strong in the New Japan umbrella because they always have been historically. They always have been. And again, it's a big story because it's the Good Brothers and their association with New Japan. That's where they really blew up as a tag team. It's where they came together as a tag team is New Japan. It's where certainly, again, Karl Anderson, but even Doc Gallows really reinvented himself was in New Japan. So they have all of that history. So it is a big story, but is it surprising? No, it's not surprising because, if anything, we've been waiting. We've been waiting for the Good Brothers to return to New Japan ever since they signed the contract with Impact Wrestling in the first place. It was very well known. It was put out there that their intention was to go back to Japan or certainly work for New Japan once the pandemic was over. We're getting to a point now where there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Again, travel to Japan is still quite difficult, but working for New Japan isn't that difficult. So the Good Brothers are back and they're working for 3 territories at the same time. Pretty impressive by Doc Gallows and Karl Anderson. Now, this past week on Impact Wrestling, we saw something that actually I'd called quite a lot recently. I'd spoken about this quite a few times when we spoke about Deonna Purrazzo, and that is that Deonna Purrazzo, as seemingly she's done with Kimber Lee and Susan as backup. Deonna Purrazzo is done with Kimber Lee and Susan. They believe that she wouldn't be the Knockouts champion without their assistance, while Deonna doesn't believe they deserve to even stand by her side. So because of this, the Virtuoso will face Susan in singles competition next week. Now, I had mentioned this before, that they had hyped this up. They had teased this for a while. That obviously, again, Kimber Lee, certainly Kimber Lee, but eventually Susan, after being transformed from Su Yung to Susan by Father James Mitchell last year, they had teased for a while that Kimber Lee and Susan, that Deonna Purrazzo wasn't happy with them. Kimber Lee and Susan have been fighting. They've been at each other's throats for a long period of time, and seemingly Deonna Purrazzo every single week loses more and more patience with them. She's more and more frustrated with how they're not getting the job done or they're not helping her out, and certainly in recent title defenses, whether that's been against Rosemary, whether that's been against Havoc or whatever, she hasn't really needed the assistance of Kimber Lee or Susan. So I've predicted for a while that I think Deonna Purrazzo would kick them to the curb, and I guess that's where we're going here. I do think when it comes to Susan, the Susan character, I think, is done. I think we need to see whatever the next iteration is of Su Yung, whatever that is, whether that's going back to Susie, which I don't think they will because that's more of a Kylie Ray spin-off, whether that's going back to Su Yung, which it might be. Of course, they went back to her at Bound for Glory last year and subsequently Turning Point when she eventually dropped the Knockouts Championship back to Deonna Purrazzo. I think they need to go back to the next version of Susan. Again, what that is, I don't know. I pitched previously, given that Steve Macklin's now coming to Impact Wrestling, given Steve Macklin's real-life relationship, of course, he's partners with Deonna Purrazzo. I mentioned before, why not trade Kimber Lee and Susan for Steve Macklin and Wesley Blake? We know, okay, Steve Macklin has signed. He made his debut of Impact Wrestling this past week in his Punisher gimmick, essentially. That's what it is. It's a Punisher gimmick. Even the logo, the Macklin logo, is like exactly like the Punisher gimmick. It's not even, it's so on the nose. I'm surprised they can get away with it, actually. I'm surprised people from Marvel Comics haven't been a bit like, that's a bit similar. That's a bit similar. Nevertheless, I pitched before that maybe Deonna Purrazzo's new backup, instead of being Kimber Lee and Susan, becomes Steve Macklin and Wesley Blake. Again, Steve Macklin's already signed. Maybe Wesley Blake's the next guy to come in because, of course, Wesley Blake was Steve Macklin's tag team partner as part of the Forgotten Sons faction along with Jackson Riker. Wesley Blake was released by WWE back in April of this year. His 90-day non-compete clause expires just before Slammiversary this year. So maybe, just maybe, the reason that Deonna Purrazzo has decided enough with Kimber Lee and Susan is actually because she's gone, actually, I've got better backup. I've got a better backup in the Forgotten Sons, and it would certainly add a different dynamic to Deonna Purrazzo. Now, the only thing I would say about that is, and I'm not too sure about that, is at this point, I really don't know if Deonna Purrazzo needs the backup. I think they're trying to get across that she doesn't need to win the matches in this sort of, in shenanigans or nefarious means anymore. Usually, Deonna Purrazzo just wins by being the best. She is one of the best female pro wrestlers, one of the best pro wrestlers in the world today, certainly. And she doesn't want to work for WWE, Triple H. But she certainly is one of the best, pro wrestlers, female pro wrestlers in the world today. And they're certainly getting that across on Impact Wrestling Television at this point. I think they're kind of going with the narrative now that she doesn't win matches by, again, by cheating or whatever. She wins matches because she's smart, she's clever, and she's just the best. And maybe they've kind of realized, Impact Wrestling officials or the creative team, you don't really need henchmen if you're just the best. So that's an interesting perspective, and maybe that's the direction that they're going in. But maybe it leads again to Su Yung once again versus Deonna Purrazzo. I don't have much interest in that again because we saw that at Bound for Glory last year and Turning Point, even though we haven't seen Su Yung in a while. As far as who she would face at Slammiversary, I mean, we saw Mickie James tease. Maybe it's Mickie James. I would still say probably Chelsea Green. They're good friends in real life, Deonna Purrazzo and Chelsea Green. So maybe we see a situation where it's Chelsea Green versus Deonna Purrazzo at Slammiversary. Again, how you would book that, with given that you can't officially sign Chelsea Green until a few days before the event, that would be something to overcome, but certainly would be interesting. Finally, I did want to talk about the Impact ratings. Now, we haven't spoken about the Impact television ratings for a while, and frankly, it's just because we haven't been able to. Obviously, Showbuzz Daily went down a few weeks ago, and a lot of the time, if Impact Wrestling doesn't crack the cable top 150, we just don't know. Unless a report comes out, it's difficult to look up. Wow, Impact Wrestling's viewership was down coming out of Against All Odds. Brandon Thurston at WrestleNomics reports that the June 17 episode of Impact Wrestling on AXS TV drew 111,000 live viewers on AXS TV. This number is down from 124,000 viewers the show drew on June 10. This number also happens to be the lowest viewership number since May 20. The show posted a 0.03 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic, down from the June 10 demographic rating of a 0.05. Thurston notes, quotes, total viewership by the same comparison is down 10%. Impact Wrestling is averaging 134,000 this month to 141,000 of June last year. So it's actually down from last year. Now, that's certainly interesting. I think given that one could argue there hasn't been a lot in terms of the production side of things. What is different to an episode of Impact from last year to this year? Not a lot. Not a lot. I think the storylines are probably better. I think we didn't have Matt Striker on commentary, but we had enhanced noise. I think the shows are easier to watch, frankly, than they were at this time last year. But in reality, if you're just skipping through the channels, is there a lot of difference between what you watched last year and what you watched this year? Again, maybe talent. Again, Kenny Omega wasn't on the show this week. You would have hoped with the fallout of Against All Odds, and given the big Sami Callihan firing, and given the Young Bucks interference and all that kind of stuff, there would be a fallout that hasn't been. And maybe it's an indicator that there isn't as much buzz heading into Slammiversary than there was last year. That's going to be interesting. But it's always difficult to talk about Impact's ratings because they're so limited and they are small. And the problem is when you're dealing with 120, 130, 140, 150,000 viewers, a drop of 1,000 viewers is suddenly a lot. And it's difficult to measure. It's difficult to measure. Now, the counter argument could be that because it's such a small pool, it's easier to measure what is and isn't working. And you could argue that obviously what they were doing in terms of the main event angle or the creative coming out of Against All Odds isn't working. I'll leave that up to you, though. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of the Impact Wrestling news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or having come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.